A devastating wave of car bombings rocks the Iraqi capital Baghdad, killing at least 60 people. Iraqi security forces free hundreds of students who were taken hostage in the University of Anbar by militants of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Petro Poroshenko swears in as president of Ukraine, promising to bring peace to the conflict-torn east of the country. And Russian President Vladimir Putin orders the border service to reinforce the state border service with neighboring Ukraine. This is Al Ittijah World News. I'm Zainab Ali. A devastating series of car bombings, mainly targeting Shiite majority areas of the capital, killed at least 60 people on Saturday evening. 11 car bombings and one roadside bomb hit 8 different areas of Baghdad, also wounding more than 150 people. So far this year, more than 4,300 people have been killed, according to figures separately compiled by the United Nations and the government. Well, as Iraq's increasing cycle of violence intensifies, fighters belonging to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant raided a university and held its students and staff hostage in the city of Ramadi. Now, this as the army continues its operation against the Al-Qaeda-linked group in the northern city of Mosul.
The Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant has increased its brutal attacks against civilians. The latest includes taking hundreds of students hostage at a university in the city of Ramadi. The extremist group infiltrated the university from several directions, killed its guards, and blew up the bridge leading to its main gate. The Iraqi army, spearheaded by special forces, was quick to surround the militants inside the campus before launching the assault. Around 1,000 students managed to escape earlier, while more fled during the military operation, which included soldiers and police. It is still unclear how many people were killed in the attack. This attack is the third massive operation by ISIL in 3 days, following a major assault on Shiite shrine in the city of Samarra on Thursday, which was foiled by security forces, as well as heavy fighting and suicide bombings in northern Iraq on Friday, when militants advanced on Mosul from the northwest and deployed in large numbers in the city. But by Friday evening, 90% of Mosul was back under government control. Fierce battles in the north are still ongoing between government forces and militants. Most of the clashes are taking place in various neighborhoods in the city of Mosul, and security officials have reported that 21 police officers and 38 militants have been killed in the fighting. Violence is running at its highest levels since 2006-2007, with the Anbar operation entering its 6th month, and now a second offensive in Mosul is underway as the war to eradicate the Al-Qaeda offshoot ISIL from the country gains momentum.
Well, let's get our correspondent in Iraq, Mustafa Al-Qattan, with us for the latest. Mustafa, we've been hearing conflicting reports over the latest there in Anbar University. What can you tell us? Are the hostages released yet? Do you have the latest death toll?
Yes, actually, the northern groups in Anbar province, northern groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda and the so-called ISIL militants infiltrated Anbar University and took several students and staff as hostages. The Iraqi security forces sealed off the campus, and the special Iraqi forces, the Iraqi army has attacked with the special Iraqi forces, clashes and confronted with these militants for several hours after they released, as the security official said, they released the whole students and the staff in the university. But unfortunately, 2 of the students have been died in that incident. Yes.
And how much control does the Iraqi army have in the region?
Yes, actually, the Iraqi security forces are deployed a lot of personnel in Anbar and in the campus and around the areas around the campus, and also implemented a curfew in order to deprive any other attacks on the campus or any other facilities. What is worth to be mentioned that the militants linked to Al Qaeda or ISIL launched several similar attacks in different provinces in Iraq, like in Nineveh and also in Baquba city in Diyala, when they attacked headquarters of the anti-terrorist device there, and they were aiming at seven of the most eminent prisoners there who linked to these groups. Also on Thursday, the militant groups tried to occupy the holy shrine of the two Imams, Ali al-Hadi and al-Hassan al-Askari. But fortunately, the Iraqi forces deprived them from occupying the holy shrine and actually killed more than 20 of the militants, and the other managed to escape from the city. Yes.
And what about these military operations in Mosul? How are they progressing?
Yes, actually, the militant groups on Friday, they took control on several facilities, the governmental facilities, of course, in Nineveh, and also some electricity stations, and shut down the power in order just to make a lot of chaos in that province. But the Iraqi security forces, backed by the Air Force and the helicopters, conducted several military operations and several attacks which killed so many militants, and now the city of Mosul, 90% of the city of Mosul is under the control of the Iraqi forces. What is worth to be mentioned that these attacks, which happened in different provinces in Iraq, have a single or some common concept or a main goal, which is to distract the security efforts and to ease the pressure on the militants who are fighting the Iraqi security forces in Fallujah for more than 6 months now. Yes.
And is there a sense among residents that sectarian violence is once again on the rise?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is there a fear among residents? Is there concerns that sectarian violence is once again on the rise?
I can't have the question. Can you repeat it, please?
Okay, is there a fear among residents that they're going back to the sectarian violence that we once saw in 2006, 2007? Is there a concern that we're going back to the same violence?
Well, the militants are trying to bring the country back to the same scenario of 2006, 2007. And it was really obvious when they tried to occupy the holy shrine of Imam al-Hadi and Hassan al-Askari and to destroy it, like when they destroyed in 2005. But the Iraqi officials, political officials and security officials confirmed that these scenarios will never be repeated, because now the ability of the Iraqi security forces have been increased, and the Iraqi forces will never allow the militants to do so, or to make the sectarian tensions to increase again in the country.
Okay, Mustafa, thank you for that. Mustafa Al-Qattan there, our correspondent in Iraq. In other news now, newly elected President Petro Poroshenko has been sworn in as Ukraine's head of state amid a political, economic and security crisis in the country. Poroshenko has vowed to restore stability in the former Soviet state, but has so far done little to nothing to end the violence in the eastern regions.
Blood-red carpets were rolled out for Petro Poroshenko as he entered parliament in Kiev, a Ukrainian billionaire, and walked out of the building, a president. After winning more than 50% of the votes in Ukraine's May 25th presidential elections, Poroshenko put his hand on the Bible and took an oath of office before the parliament that ousted President Viktor Yanukovych following months of political turmoil.
I am assuming the presidency in order to preserve and strengthen Ukraine's unity. This is the moment of truth. It is up to us to decide our future.
Delegations from 56 countries attended the inauguration ceremony. Representing Washington, U.S. Vice President Joe Biden stood out among the attendees, as the United States has backed the coup in Ukraine since day one. Another prominent figure was Moscow's representative, who reminded the former economy minister of a looming deadline. Russia has threatened to stop delivering gas to Ukraine without prepayment, but has postponed the cuts until Monday. In the middle of his speech, Poroshenko switched languages, speaking Russian to address the eastern regions. The Western-backed president faces a mammoth political and economic crisis. The ultimate test is believed to be handling the situation in the country's eastern provinces, where a Kiev-ordained military crackdown is in full swing. Poroshenko has pledged to complete the EU association agreement by signing the economic part of the treaty and is set to hold early parliamentary elections. Standing on a platform built on the remnants of a wrecked Ukraine, Poroshenko has taken charge of restoring stability in the country and may have bitten more than he can chew.
Well, to get some more analysis on this, we have international affairs commentator and Balkans specialist Marko Dezic. Mr. Dezic, good to have you with us today. So, how wide is this gap between Poroshenko's wishes and the reality on the ground? I mean, can this new president really steer Ukraine out of a crisis? Mr. Dezic, are you with us? Okay, it seems we're witnessing some technical difficulties. We'll get back to Mr. Marko Dezic as soon as he's with us. Moving on now, residents of the pro-Russian regions in eastern Ukraine had different reactions to the inauguration of Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, with some expressing hope that peace will return to the violence-stricken east.
Here in the Donetsk region in eastern Ukraine, where Kiev is carrying out a military offensive against pro-Russian activists, the swearing-in of Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko was met with different reactions. But first and foremost, residents in the east of the country were hopeful at the thought of returning peace to the region.
There was no other alternative for Ukraine's presidency, and I think there will be changes, especially after Russian President Vladimir Putin recognized him.
Given the fact that he was not ruling the country yet and has just started, I think we can change something, because there was no dialogue. The offensive just immediately started. That's why in any case it's time to stop everything and come to a peace dialogue.
For others, Poroshenko's inauguration was a sham, with many claiming he is not the ultimate decision-maker.
Poroshenko is not the boss. The United States gives the orders. He doesn't. I'm sure nothing will improve under him.
We've got our own state, the Donetsk People's Republic, even if no one recognizes us yet. I hope for my grandson that he can live in an independent republic where he will be able to speak Russian.
Ukrainian troops mobilized in the Russian-speaking east to fight against anti-Kiev groups after protesters in Maidan ousted President Viktor Yanukovych and installed an opposition-held government. Luhansk and Donetsk have held a referendum to secede from Kiev and even asked Russia to integrate it with the Federation, and therefore boycotted the May 25th presidential vote, believing it does not represent them.
Well, let's get back to Marko Dezic there to discuss this a bit further. He's an international affairs commentator and Balkans specialist. Mr. Dezic, good to have you with us today. So how wide is the gap between Poroshenko's wishes and the reality on the ground? Can the new president really steer Ukraine out of a crisis?
I don't think so. The new president, Poroshenko, is saying one thing and his army is doing another. He's talking of negotiating with the East, and his army is killing civilians in the East. So he's really continuing the old way, but just with a different tone of voice. He looks very pleasant, but behind him is the same unelected group of individuals and unelected forces that were controlling events in Ukraine from the start. The CIA, the right-wing extremists, you could call it a little axis of evil that's behind Poroshenko, and none of them are elected, and we really don't hear those discussions. All we see is their effects, and their effects on the people of Ukraine, particularly in the east, are an army which seems to be out of control and determined to force force peace by gunfire and by killing. And we should remember that in one big reason why this is happening is because the US IMF $17 billion loan that Ukraine received was given on condition that Kiev controlled all of Ukraine. So Kiev is now trying to control all of Ukraine. In this way, the US has ensured that violence and conflict will continue.
Yes, and this is really his biggest challenge, to control the situation in the east. So how is he willing to deal with the country's unruly eastern province? I mean, we've seen little of it change so far. He has demonstrated little intention to replace the airstrikes, as you are saying, in the Donetsk and the Luhansk regions.
Well, what he's set out his stall, as we say in England. He's said no to federalization, no to negotiation, and no to the status of Russian as the second official language of Ukraine, which it has always had. So in a way, he's saying, I will give you nothing, he's saying to the people in the East. All I will give you is blood and sweat and tears at your expense. In other words, he's really actually gone worse, if that was possible, than Yatsenyuk, who at least recognized the need for some movement in these areas. We now have a more hawkish American line coming from Poroshenko, and this seems to me to be a victory of US policy over perhaps a more conciliatory line that might have been expected from the Europeans. What we have here is bringing a war closer, and certainly is bringing sanctions closer against Russia, because of course Russia at a certain point will have to help those people under attack in the east, and when it does so, sanctions against Russia will be the result. That will be mostly affecting the European Union, and the European Union will then be forced to turn away from Russia and turn to America. And that is the American plan, to subordinate the EU, the European Union, economically through its planned trade agreement with the EU, and militarily through NATO. And by driving a Ukrainian wedge, a barrier between Russia and the European Union, the Americans are bringing the day closer when Europe is fully dominated even more by the US.
Well, how is Poroshenko willing to deal with these painful reforms and losses from the severing economic ties with Russia?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
How is Poroshenko willing to deal with the economic crisis in the country, those painful reforms and the losses from severing economic ties with Russia?
Well, I think Poroshenko, as I say, may not be controlling events, because what is going to happen with this orientation is Ukraine's economic collapse. It's already on the way there with a rise in fuel prices, with a terrible crop yield that's occurred this year. Ukraine is in severe economic difficulty, and it can only be helped by a joint approach by Russia and Europe and indeed the United States. If that happens, Ukraine has a chance. Otherwise, really economically, Ukraine will reach a stage when the previous president will seem like a beautiful dream for the Ukrainian people as they suffer under the current one. So really, there is no way out of Ukraine's collapse, which is coming, unless it's through a joint approach with Russia included. But the problem is that the way that the Americans frame the discussion, they say, we don't want to let Ukraine have federalization because the Russians would want it. They behave as if whatever the Russians want is bad because the Russians want it. So there is no, it's a zero for the Russians and everything for the Americans in the American concepts of things. But there's no moral basis for this. This is simply going to destroy Ukraine and destroy European-Russian cooperation, all to the benefit of American corporations, which will get the money from the European markets lost by Russia. So really, I have to say, it's the American administration which needs to control its own desires in this area, and that's the only way to peace. The problem is in Washington, not in Moscow, and perhaps not even in Brussels.
Okay, now how can you interpret Russian President Vladimir Putin's order to tighten control on the Russian-Ukrainian border? Where is this likely to lead?
To tighten control on the Ukrainian border?
Yes.
Well, President Putin has a difficulty because he's committed to a peaceful outcome. He wants to see a peaceful resolution of this crisis. He's constantly calling for it. But the other side, fomented by Washington, is insisting on a military solution to this crisis. So President Putin will be forced increasingly to mobilize his military to send a signal to the other side to stop. And one hopes that the other side will listen. But that's the context in which I'd see military moves by Russia. They're forced on Russia because Russia does not want to have a war on its border, nor does it want to have NATO on its border. Russia wants to have a stable buffer state called Ukraine, which incorporates the good wishes of everyone who lives in it through a federal system which reconciles the different sides of Ukraine in one country. Anything else is a failed state which will be condemned to conflict or mass killings and certainly economic collapse. So President Putin's way is, I think, the only way for Ukraine if we're realistic. The Washington approach is conflict and war and separation and splitting. And so, as I say, the problem is in Washington, not in Moscow.
And another thing for Moscow now, how significant is this influx of refugees from neighboring Ukraine into Russia?
Well, it's as significant as the Russians want to make it. Obviously, a major state like Russia can cope with a flow of refugees, but it doesn't want to, and it's really a signal that they're trying to minimize civilian casualties, which Poroshenko seems to be unwilling to consider in his own moves. So really, Russia is trying to avoid a humanitarian crisis and a humanitarian catastrophe by taking these people into Russia itself. But again, it can't keep doing that, and the message here is that there is something very wrong when these people have to flee from their own government in Kiev. It clearly is not their own government, not a government of their own choice, illegally brought to power, not elected, and the election of President Poroshenko does not change that. The reality is that the Kievan policy, which began on February the 21st this year, of oppressing the East and denying them their rights, which was why the East rose up, is continuing. It's continuing under Poroshenko as it did under Yatsenyuk. It is the same story. It's a bad story, and it will end badly if they continue.
Okay, Mr. Marko Dezic, their international affairs commentator and Balkans specialist. A pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Now, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is optimistic that there will be progress in resolving the Ukrainian crisis with Russia's help, only hours after Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko took an oath of office.
We hope that in the next few days we can see some steps taken that will reduce the tensions, the possibility of a ceasefire, the possibility of Russia helping to be able to get the separatists to begin to put their guns away, get out of buildings and begin to build Ukraine where people's needs can be met. I'm confident there are ways forward. We look for Russia's help, and our hope is that we won't have to move to more serious sanctions and other steps.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has issued an order to the Federal Security Service to strengthen protection of the country's border with Ukraine to prevent people crossing illegally.
In a move seen by many as good faith, Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the Russian State Border Service to take appropriate steps in tightening its control on the Russian-Ukrainian border. Russian news agencies close to the president's press service reported that Putin ordered border guards to take all measures to prevent illegal crossings. The move came as Kiev announced a day earlier that it abandoned 3 border posts neighboring Russia in the volatile Lugansk region of eastern Ukraine after several attacks by unknown gunmen. Authorities also said that thousands of Ukrainians were flooding in across the border into Russia to escape the armed conflict. Recently, Russian authorities registered a growing number of Ukrainian citizens wishing to enter Russian territory. For example, on Friday, over 12,000 people arrived in the Rostov region from Ukraine. A day earlier, over 8,000 Ukrainian citizens crossed the border, bringing the number of refugees to 20,000 in 24 hours. A state of emergency has been declared in the Rostov region of Russia due to an influx of refugees from neighboring Ukraine. The new arrivals are currently being allocated to local recreation centers where they have been processed. The refugees are provided with housing, food, basic necessities, and access to counseling services, as well as assistance in providing shelter for women and children fleeing. the Ukrainian border regions.
Stay with us here on Al Ittijah World News, still to come. Flash floods kill more than 100 people in Afghanistan. Welcome back. Our top stories are: a devastating wave of car bombings rocks the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, killing at least 60 people. Iraqi security forces free hundreds of students who were taken hostage in the University of Anbar by militants of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Petro Poroshenko swears in as president of Ukraine, promising to bring peace to the conflict-torn east of the country. And Russian President Vladimir Putin orders the border service to reinforce the state border service with neighboring Ukraine. With a July 20 deadline for a comprehensive agreement over Iran's nuclear program drawing closer and major issues still entangled, Iranian officials announced new rounds of negotiations with the US and Russia aimed at setting the stage for decisive P5+1 talks in Vienna.
Racing ahead of a July 20th deadline, Iran and major world powers are stepping up efforts to work out the details of a final deal on the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. The Foreign Ministry in Tehran has announced that Iran will hold 2 days of nuclear talks with the United States starting Monday, and then conduct 2 further days of negotiations with Russia in Rome. The unprecedented set of direct bilateral talks come immediately before Iran's next round of political discussions with the P5+1 group in Vienna, slated for June 16th through the 20th. Saturday's announcement also revealed that Tehran was working to arrange other bilateral discussions with members of the P5+1 before the Vienna meeting. Several rounds of talks have already been held in Vienna, but the latest in mid-May ended with no apparent progress on a deal. Following the last round of negotiations in Vienna, Iran urged Western powers to resist pressure from third parties not directly involved in negotiations over its nuclear activities, in a clear reference to the US and Zionist regime. Officials hope to reach final consensus over an interim deal reached in November of 2013, limiting Iran's atomic activities in exchange for a lifting of sanctions. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking for both sides, as many fear failure to reach an agreement could have disastrous consequences in the region.
Now, clashes broke out between rival demonstrators gathering for a show of support and opposition to renegade General Khalifa Haftar in the Libyan capital Tripoli, raising fears that the ongoing battles in the eastern territories will plunge the country into further strife.
The ongoing violence in Libya's eastern regions has sparked just what the public have been trying to avoid for a while. The war of two camps being fought on the ground and inside the parliament's court has resulted in a sharp division amongst Libyans. These differences were as clear as day in the capital Tripoli. Rival demonstrators gathered in Martyrs Square to voice support to each of the warring sides. The few meters separating the two gatherings did little to spur an inevitable confrontation. Supporters of renegade General Khalifa Haftar came out to show support for the so-called Operation Dignity. Their cheers and banners were met with similar boisterous slogans from the other side, where supporters of the General National Congress and the government of Ahmed Maitig assembled. And it was not long before confrontations erupted. The loud exchange of words developed into fighting, with demonstrators throwing stones and using sticks. The clashes reportedly left several people injured. The incident came as fighting raged on. Haftar's forces shelled several sites belonging to Ansar al-Sharia militants in Benghazi. The battles coincided with unprecedented calls by outgoing Prime Minister Abdullah Thani for Libyan residents to take up arms and fight alongside the special forces against the unofficial militias, an invitation which many believe could further escalate the crisis in the North African country.
An Egyptian court has postponed the verdict in the trial of Muslim Brotherhood leader Muhammad Badia and 47 co-defendants until July 5th. Saturday's session was marred by chaos as the defendants chanted anti-military slogans after entering the dock. The Islamist figures are accused of inciting murder and attacking public property during what is known as the Kuwailib incident, which led to the killing of 2 people only a few days after the ousting of former President Mohamed Morsi. Well, Egypt's President-elect Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is trying to warm up the frosty relations with neighboring countries, most notably Ethiopia, ahead of his inauguration on Sunday. Our Cairo correspondent Karim Azzeddin filed this report.
Ethiopian Foreign Minister Tedros Adhanom has arrived in Cairo to attend the official inauguration of Egyptian President-elect Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, which will be held on Sunday. Adhanom is heading a high-level delegation of Ethiopian officials at the formal request of interim leader Adli Mansour, who had sent an invitation to Addis Ababa to attend Sisi's swearing-in ceremony.
بكل تأكيد وصول وزير خارجية أثيوبيا للقاهرة.
The arrival of Ethiopian Foreign Minister in Cairo in response to Adli Mansour's invitation comes following months of talks between the Egyptian administration and Ethiopian officials that boosted the historic ties between the two countries as well as mutual interests.
The visit to Cairo would be the first by a high-level Ethiopian delegation, since relations between the two countries were marred by disputes over the negative impact of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam on Egypt's share of water resources. Commentators consider this invitation to be an indicator that the new administration in Egypt will adopt a new set of foreign policies to reinforce the country's regional and international relations.
The new administration in Egypt has declared its support to the renaissance of the Ethiopian nation as long as it doesn't affect Egypt in a negative way.
I'm optimistic about the new policies regarding the Egyptian, African, Ethiopian, and Arab relations. Our neighbors are supporting us with concrete action, not just words.
Tensions between the two countries reached their peak last year, as Ethiopia and other African states endorsed an accord known as the Nile Basin Countries Cooperative Framework Agreement, which replaces a 1929 treaty that had granted Egypt veto power over any project on the Nile in upstream countries. It's obvious that the new administration in Egypt is highly concerned about restoring the country's foreign relations, especially with its African neighbors, as commentators assured on the great impact these policies would have on Egypt's national security. Reporting for Litigat TV from Cairo, Karim Azzeddin.
And with the apparent blessing of President-elect Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Western advisors are drawing up plans for reshaping the Egyptian economy. Now, this as Riyadh offered Cairo economic development assistance.
Saudi Arabia has pledged financial support for the government of Egypt's declared president-elect Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. In a telephone conversation, King Abdullah congratulated Sisi on his win, saying Riyadh is ready to offer economic development assistance to Cairo. This is the kingdom's duty based on our religion, ethnics, and the joint destiny of the two countries. But the Egyptian leader is also relying on other sources of foreign aid. According to reports, the president-elect is planning to hire Western advisors to manage the country's faltering economy. There is no doubt that the premier's priority is Egypt's damaged economy, but will this be enough to drag the Arab world's most populous nation out of its economic crisis? The Egyptian economy has long been suffering from corruption, red tape, high unemployment, and a widening budget deficit, aggravated by the fuel subsidies that cost nearly $19 billion a year. Officials forecast economic growth at just 3.2% in the fiscal year that begins on July 1st, well below levels needed to create enough jobs for a rapidly growing population and ease widespread poverty. The toughest problem, however, will be the energy subsidies. Raising fuel and electricity prices could provoke unrest in a country where street protests have helped to depose two leaders in 3 years. Since the 2011 revolution, Egyptians have seen near non-stop protests, the toppling of two presidents, 7 elections, and a seemingly endless political crisis. But what they haven't witnessed yet is what has been demanded all along, a better economy. Sisi has long stated that he can help the masses through launching projects that will improve the already wavering economy, something the president-elect insists he can be trusted to deliver. Although Sisi wants strong public support for removing Islamist leader Mohamed Morsi, failure to revitalize the economy could quickly strip away his popularity and bring Egyptians back onto the streets.
Flash flooding in the remote northern Afghan province of Baghlan has killed at least 100 people and forced thousands to abandon their homes in a new devastating tragedy that has hit the turbulent country.
Heavy torrential rains followed by flash floods have killed more than 100 people in Gazarginar district, a month after a landslide triggered by heavy rains buried a village and killed 300 people in a nearby region. Afghan disaster management officials said they were scrambling to secure food and medical aid to the area after torrential rains unleashed the floods. Afghan officials recovered scores of dead bodies from the area, including women and children, with several people reportedly still missing. In early May, a similar disaster left hundreds of families homeless in Argo district of the mountainous province, which borders Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan. The floods and landslides follow recent severe flooding that have affected a vast swathe of Afghanistan, particularly northern provinces, with 175 people dead and tens of thousands displaced. The twin disasters highlight the challenges facing the underdeveloped country as the nation heads into the second round of presidential elections on June 14th. Flooding and landslides often occur during the spring rainy season in northern Afghanistan, with flimsy mud houses offering little protection against rising water levels and torrents of mud.
Now for some lighter news, grasshopper hamburgers and scorpion lollipops. Washington residents outside the White House feasted on these little critters as part of an event to promote the culinary, nutritional, and ecological advantages of consuming edible insects.
So we're going to add, this is the dehydrated grasshoppers.
Not far from the White House, Rodney Scruggs is preparing a meal with a difference. With his signature grasshopper hamburger, he hopes to convert more people to the benefits of edible insects.
You know, the cricket and the dried grasshoppers, very similar to tofu. They take on the profiles of the other stuff, high in protein. I don't think it's so hot right now, but it's definitely a hot trend when you're reading about it that I think it's going to start going that way.
Curious residents have come by the dozen to challenge their taste buds. For some, it's their first ever insect-filled burger. But for others, Edible insects already make up part of their normal diet.
It's high in protein, it's good. So I grew up eating a lot of bugs, so I enjoy it.
Also on the menu today, roasted crickets. The buffet is hosted by Elric Pest Control, who've promised to donate $5 to charity for every volunteer brave enough to try the crunchy insects. But not everybody needs an incentive.
These are Mexican spice mealworms, so they're kind of spicy and hot, and a little bit of barbecue flavor, so a bit salty. And crunchy, that's the main thing.
Those with a sweet tooth haven't been left out either. A delicious dessert awaits, a lollipop with a fried scorpion inside.
Now, Colombia is back in the FIFA World Cup Championship following a 16-year hiatus, preparing to face Ivory Coast, Greece and Japan. The team suffers a significant loss, however, after their striker Radamel Falcao was dropped from the squad due to a severe knee injury.
It was a dream come true for Colombia when they reached the World Cup for the first time since 1998. During the match against Chile that ensured the Colombian team's trip to Brazil, they managed to rally from being 3-0 down to wangle a 3-3 draw.
This was very, very emotional. First Chile, we were suffering, but then no longer. We managed to score, and we're going to the World Cup. We will support the national team at all times.
As the second South American team to qualify after Argentina, 8th in the FIFA rankings, and with an outstanding defence, Colombia has high expectations for its team.
We're calm. With this group, we're trying to isolate ourselves, in the sense that we want to avoid the pressure getting to us. So we're quite calm, but we're anxious, of course. We're waiting for the moment to be able to show why we've made it to the World Cup.
But Colombia was rattled when coach Jose Pekerman announced that the team's talismanic striker, Radamel Falcao, will miss the World Cup. The country had been holding its breath since the star player sustained a knee injury playing for his club Monaco in January. But the team's medical experts deemed Falcao's fitness level unsatisfactory, and he was dropped from the 23-player squad.
When these things happen, we're very sad because these are players that bring a lot to the team, and we're a family. We're sorry when a teammate goes.
Colombia is drawn in Group C in Brazil with Ivory Coast, Greece and Japan. Their hopes of making it into the second round will in part rest now on the shoulders of Falcao's Monaco teammate, midfielder James Rodriguez. Colombia will play their opening match against Greece on June 14th in Belo Horizonte.
Sudan's youth are using the online social networking service Twitter to help people attain one of the country's most vital food staples, flour. Our Khartoum correspondent Ahmed Saeed Ahmed tells us more now about the campaign dubbed 1 kilogram of flour.
Social media networks have opened up a range of possibilities for young people in Sudan. These youths met on Twitter and became friends before launching a campaign dubbed 1 kilogram of flour.
We decided to make this thing or campaign Kilo de Gig, which means 1 kilogram of flour. 1 kilogram of flour can help many people in Sudan because flour is essential.
Flour is indeed essential. It is almost the sole most common ingredient of any meal in the country. It can be used in a variety of recipes and prepared in a multitude of fashions, giving families an array of dish options. The initiative works in a simple yet very effective way.
So basically we meet at open square in downtown Khartoum. It's called Atenay. Okay? Volunteers come there from 5 p.m. till 8 p.m. We receive donation of flour, and we know that some people can't come to us. So we activated the phone number. You can find it on our Facebook page or Twitter accounts.
The volunteers receive these donations and then they proceed to the next stage, distributing flour to different families which they have already identified through meticulous statistics and cooperation with government and popular bodies. The initiative, however, urged these youths to explore more possibilities.
This initiative has made us see another side of Sudan, and this is just the beginning. Kilo de Gig makes us more enthusiastic about more initiative that could take place in the future and help the people of Sudan. We are looking to solve part of the problem around us. We feel like so far our initiative will succeed in sustaining hundreds of families.
The initiative is a new one, but it had made quite an impression on many. A filmmaker touring through Khartoum was a witness to the effort and the purpose that effort serves.
I'm very impressed. I think I haven't seen anything like that in Khartoum before. And the fact that young people living in central Khartoum do care about the population who is in the outskirts. I don't know if you can call these suburbs IDPs anymore, or I don't know how they call these places, but I visited these places, and definitely a lot of people need that kind of food.
Be it a kilogram of flour or a drop of water, said one beneficiary, charity and human fraternity are what counts, and they are never measured in quantity. 1 kilogram of flour may not be a big donation, but put together, these donations amount to much and can make a difference, with the latter being the very goal these youth are after. Ahmed Saeed Ahmed, Al-Tijah News Channel, Khartoum.
Now a reminder of our top stories. A devastating wave of car bombings rocks the Iraqi capital Baghdad, killing at least 60 people. Iraqi security forces free hundreds of students who were taken hostage in the University of Anbar by militants of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant. Petro Poroshenko swears in as president of Ukraine, promising to bring peace to the conflict-torn east of the country. And Russian President Vladimir Putin orders the border service to reinforce the state border service with neighboring Ukraine. That's it for today. Have a good night.